Our second reading this morning does indeed come from the first letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. However, it does not come from chapter 1. That is a misprint. It is a chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. Listen for God's word to you this morning. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I came to you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. My speech and my proclamation were not with plausible words of wisdom, but with a demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might rest not on human wisdom, but on the power of God. Yet among the mature we do speak wisdom, though it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age, who are doomed to perish. But we speak God's wisdom, secret and hidden, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor human heart conceived, what God has prepared for those who love Him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For what human being knows what is truly human except the human spirit that is within? So also no one comprehends what is truly God's except the Spirit of God. Now, we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit that is from God, so that we may understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. And we speak of these things in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual things to those who are spiritual. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I hope we can all appreciate the irony of this situation. Here we've just heard from Paul in his letter to the early church, contrasting the simple message of the gospel with the lure of believing something because the person who says it speaks well and persuasively. Followed by what? A person who is tasked with getting up here in front of you, who we all hope will speak well and persuasively, so that we might trust in the promise of the gospel. To quote Admiral Akbar in the Star Wars movie Return of the Jedi, it's a trap. Or at least it feels like one to me. But Paul raises an interesting question, born of the tension that is in many ways inherent to this thing we call church, the community that we form around the gospel and sustained by what Tom Long calls talking ourselves into being Christian. How do we know that what we're doing is born of God, of God's desire as it's represented in the cross of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, or born of the trappings that satisfy a completely different need in our lives? In Paul's day, there were no podcasts, no social media, no cable news, no opinion page in the local Corinth Gazette, because, of course, there was no Corinth Gazette. There was no self-help section of the local Barnes & Noble, because there wasn't one of those either. Books in general were a rarity, given that more people were illiterate than literate. No, if people wanted some guidance on what to think about something or how to orient their lives, they fell back on the shared practice of their local community and the eloquence of orators who were the influencers of their day, making the rounds to share the wisdom of the age. And while the methods of sharing and communicating ideas have changed dramatically with the advent of print, broadcast, and digital media, the question and the tension remain the same. How much of what we give our lives to is the product of persuasive speech that gives us a sense of identity, belonging, and well-being? And how much of it is born of a wisdom that is not of this age? A wisdom, rather, that is from God. In fact, if anything, the prevalence of so many voices coming at us from so many directions, trying to get us to subscribe to their particular brand of thinking, living, acting, voting, only makes what Paul is talking about here more urgent. We are a country divided in large measure due to the lure of words that will confirm our bias or appease the cognitive dissonance created when the words we affirm fail to match the realities we say we support. The danger, as Paul puts it, is that if we are spiritually immature, we may confuse the wisdom of the world and all that it promises with the wisdom of God that looks far different through the lens of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen. One of the best descriptions of this contrast came 500 years ago from the German reformer Martin Luther, whose 95 theses nailed to the door of the church in Wittenberg sparked the Protestant Reformation of which Presbyterians are a part. Luther would contrast what he called the theology of glory with the theology of the cross. As Luther surveyed his world, he could see many otherwise faithful people subscribing to this theology of glory that focused on power and human strength. Such views often saw God as a means to their own personal end, the one to give them their heart's desire, happiness, prosperity, and success. The goal was to have God bless their endeavors, whether that was militarily or nationally or commercially. To such a worldview, the foolishness of the cross even is mitigated by making it just one more means to a preferred end. Jesus died so that we could go to heaven. Unsurprisingly, that same theology of glory is very popular today. A while back, a preacher made a name for himself by promoting a more masculine Jesus, one who is a fighter with a sword in his hand and a commitment to make someone bleed. That's a direct quote. It's an extremely attractive promise to people looking for that sort of thing, looking for strength, looking for success, looking for the promise of something they ultimately feel is lacking in their lives. But it's the spirit of the world that Paul is talking about. It's a spirit that blesses cruelty as strength, lying as intelligence, and fraud as just good business sense. By contrast, Luther pointed out that the theology of the cross reveals God's strength to us in Jesus' weakness and our own human weakness. That's because for as fearfully and wonderfully as we are made in God's image, we are also incapable of saving ourselves from stumbling. falling and failing. It isn't a matter of self-discipline or self-control. The truth is that sin is real and we are captive to it. But the good news is that rather than condemning us for how we fail, in the cross, God meets us and knows us in the pain of that captivity. Because a world enamored with its own strength and power is a world held captive to sin, and it will always, always seek to destroy the kind of generous and indiscriminate love that is embodied in Jesus. The spirit of the world cannot stand something it cannot own or control or commodify in some transactional way for its own benefit. So it will find a way to get rid of it, rather than have its claim on the world challenged in that way. The cross of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, reveals how spiritually bankrupt the theology of glory is. The problem is that once we've had a taste of glory, once we've been given a sniff of power and how it makes us feel to be seen and heard and considered important, well, friends, that is one heck of a drug. And we start looking for ways to justify it, to validate it, to make the gospel more about that than about the cross, which, let's face it, looks more like losing than winning, at least as far as the spirit of the world goes. Not to belabor the obvious, but this building, this block that we occupy, is a monument to that kind of glory. Don't get me wrong, it's clear that the congregation at Fifth and Silver had outgrown its building, there had been a fire, and the post-war influx of young professionals to Sandia Lab, Kirkland Air Force Base, and all its outliers made First Presbyterian Church a very popular destination. I've heard countless stories of couples who first met here as young single people and found lifelong friends. Back then, what are known as the historic mainline churches, churches like ours, were in their heyday. A theologian, not some broadcast preacher, but a scholarly theologian, made the cover of Time magazine. Newspapers used to cover what the preachers of tall steeple churches said in their Sunday sermons. People listened to us. They even took what we said to heart sometimes. Last week, I invoked Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA album. One of the hits off that album was a song called Glory Days. Yeah, just sitting back trying to recapture a little of the glory of, well, the time slips away and leaves you with nothing, mister, but boring stories of glory days. Sadly, we are still more prone to chase after that glory, the spirit of the world, than we are the cross of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen. In the third movie of the Knives Out trilogy, Wake Up Dead Man, Father Judd is explaining to the famous detective Benoit Blanc why he became a priest. Blanc thinks that church offered him a hiding place and absolution to this boxer who had once killed a man in the ring. The guy I killed in the ring, Father Judd explains, I hated him. It wasn't an accident. I killed him with hate in my heart. There's no hiding from that. There's no solving it. He doesn't hide me. He doesn't fix me. He loves me when I'm guilty. That is the power of Christ crucified, who loves us at our most guilty. When we subject him to the pain of the cross, the pain of the innocent who suffer at the hands of the powerful, the pain we inflict on one another in so many ways. Father Judd doesn't want to play Benoit Blanc's whodunit game, but in some ways he could be talking about the spirit of the world. It's all a game, Father Judd cries, solving it, winning it, getting your big checkmate moment. By using me, you're setting me against my real and only purpose in life, which is not to fight the wicked and bring them to justice, but to serve them and bring them to Christ. What Paul wants the church to know, both then and now, is that by playing the world's game of glory, we are being used to advance the very thing that is set against God, the very thing that put Jesus on the cross in the first place. The way of the cross, the way of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, may look like weakness. But to the mature, it is a demonstration of what true strength looks like. It may look like irrelevance and decline because it has stopped chasing the markers of glory, the numbers that we think will validate our existence. It may look like failure and even death. But only if you don't know the rest of the story. We preach Jesus Christ and him crucified, because to die with him is to die to the spirit of the world, and to be raised with him is to be lifted from the graves that this world would bury us in, to a whole new kind of life. Hallelujah. Amen. Would you stand as together we affirm